Well, hello, everybody. Roger Durling here, Executive Director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. And I'm so excited to talk about the new film, I'm Your Woman, with co-writer and director Julia Hart, with co-writer and producer Jordan Horowitz, and producer and star of the film, Rachel Brosnahan. Before I start, I actually want to read a review from a quote from the review from Richard Roper, Chicago Sun-Times. He says, with spare and precise dialogue, a labyrinthian story with a few heart-stopping twists and pitch perfect performances by Brosnahan and the supporting cast. This is one of the best movies of the year, 2020, of course, and I couldn't agree more. Welcome. I have seen the film about 3 times and I cannot get enough of it. There is one aspect that I want to start with that I know that you guys didn't make this film thinking about COVID. How could you have? But there is, when I watch the film, there is a sense of isolation that the film explores. There's questions about what does it mean to be alone are addressed in the film, and also who do you trust, and community. And race as well. Julie and Jordan, is that how do you feel that those themes are reverberating even stronger now that we're in this pandemic?
It's funny. I totally agree with you. And it was wild to shoot the movie pre-pandemic and essentially do all of our post-production remotely and in quarantine, to watch how the movie changed for us, the people who had made it. And we were so curious about how that would feel watching it. So many people probably watched the movie alone in quarantine, in isolation, who would have under normal circumstances gone to a movie theater to see it with their friends. And, Jordan and I have talked a lot about how this period of quarantine and isolation and pandemic has just really made us all put a mirror to ourselves, and get rid of and stop caring about the things that do not really matter, that we all obsess about in our contemporary society. And so I think in a lot of ways, the movie is just bringing to the surface everything that is universal and timeless, both the good and the bad. And, we wrote Jean's isolation very much about, we came up with the idea for the film when we had our first newborn. We have 2 little boys, our first newborn baby. And the experience of new parenthood is very isolating. You are stuck at home by yourself most of the time. You feel really disconnected from your life before and from your community in a lot of ways. And so it was interesting to see how releasing the film while everyone is quarantining allows that to be even a universal experience, that it's not just something new parents can connect to, but unfortunately it's something we can all connect to right now. And I think that since the beginning of time, we've all wanted to come together and crave human connection and community, but now so more than ever. And that was always a main theme of the film, was this idea of how the only way to survive and the only way to thrive is to come together. And so I hope we will all be getting to do that again very soon.
And just like to tweak that last bit a little bit, even more specifically, and I think that is part of what is so resonant about it right now, is this idea that trauma is something that is very isolating. It's something that you feel very alone in very often. And the roadmap to trauma recovery is very often community and talking to people that have either experienced similar traumas or are able to sort of take some of your burden in a way. And I think that was just the roadmap that we wanted to explore in this picture. And then COVID and quarantine and all of that have been this global traumatic experience. And so hopefully, as Julia was saying, there is a bit of a roadmap towards recovery, which is, refinding community and community in new ways, and community through the priorities that we have sort of rediscovered during this time of being alone. I think is a particularly interesting aspect of why this, is resonant.
Rachel, I read this interview where you said, and I'm quoting you, I like to play characters I don't immediately understand. You know, can you tell us about what about Jean and about reading it and in relationship to that quote that I like to play characters I don't immediately understand.
Yeah, what a gift to be able to finish a script and have more questions than answers. I feel like that's something that I always look for when embarking on a new project. And that's how I know that a script has resonated with me, is when I find myself thinking about it after I've put it down and asking all these questions about it inside my head, and really excited to get to sit down, as I did get to sit down with Julia and you know, bombard her with 1 million questions about the character, which she so generously answered. Yeah, it's that fear factor that we're both so afraid of, that many performers are, and I certainly am. You know, it's terrifying to approach a character that you feel like you don't have a grip on, and yet we're addicted to it somehow. I feel like I only have something to offer if it feels like I'm about to step off a cliff. And that was certainly this project. It was Jean's, you know, Jordan so beautifully spoke about the isolation of trauma. It was Jean's particular response to trauma that I think I didn't initially understand, and had a lot of questions about who Jean was before we meet her the first time, who she is when we meet her the first time, and who she becomes once this baby enters her life, and why she struggles to connect with him, and how to kind of wrap my head around that as someone who hasn't necessarily experienced the same trauma as Jean. And Julia and I had a number of really beautiful conversations that helped crack open this story for me.
Julia, before we went on air, we started talking about the genres, and I'm a big admirer, as you know, of your films and how you grab a genre and you basically turn it inside out. You know, can you tell us the journey of I'm Your Woman?
Yeah, I mean, you know, as we were talking before, I love a lot of different genres of film, and I love them in spite of the fact that they don't always represent me. And part of the fun that Jordan and I have in exploring different genres, you know, Fast Color is like a small indie character take on what it means to have superpowers. And I'm Your Woman is obviously looking at the crime genre through the eyes of the women and the children and the people who are victims of the white male criminals' selfishness and destructive tendencies. And so I think it's really fun to explore the rules and the set pieces and the tropes of all of those different genres, but from a totally different perspective. And again, I mentioned that we first started writing this when we first became parents. And so I was particularly struck by, you know, how hard it is when you have how life altering and crazy it is when you become a parent. You have this new baby, this helpless thing that you have to do everything for and take care of, and you've never done it before, and nothing can really prepare you for it, no matter how many books you read or how many other parents you talk to. It feels like this incredibly unique experience and this miracle. What would it mean to be new at that and also have to go on the run? And so that was the inciting idea for the film.
I mean, you obviously love movies, and Tuesday Weld, you quote Tuesday Weld from Thief in saying, I'm your woman. The very early in the film, Jean gets the doors closed on her the way that Diane Keaton's door is closed at the end of The Godfather. You basically subvert what we've seen in 1970s crime movies, where the you know, I mentioned to you earlier that I was always fascinated with the woman in Dog Day Afternoon, the wife, that we only see her on the phone temporarily, but then she has this whole different world out there. when did that come about? The idea of seeing the world of these characters that are usually in the periphery of crime movies.
I love that you brought up Dog Day Afternoon. That's such an amazing performance. Chris Sarandon, right?
Chris Sarandon plays the lover, but he also
Yeah. Oh,
has
yeah.
he also has a wife that calls in.
Yes. Of course, that's right. I haven't seen that movie in a really long time. But also Chris Sarandon character, is someone who we only see peripherally as well, and there's a whole other world there. But I think again, it was like we were watching all of these films. We were on like a crime drama bender when we first became parents, and so I was just as a woman, when I'm watching any movie, I'm always drawn to the women, even if they're supporting characters. But I think I was even more aware of, there's a I think it's Sonny's wife in The Godfather is like in the background. He's on the phone and she's in the background of one scene, and this baby is just crying, and like it just adds so much tension, and it just and so much drama to that moment. And like I'm supposed to be focusing on him on the phone, but I couldn't stop thinking about her and wondering, God, what is all of this like for her, and what is she experiencing, and what is that baby experiencing? And I think the main reason that we didn't explore those stories and those characters was because most of the people telling those stories and making those movies were straight white men, and so they were most interested in the straight white male characters that were committing the crimes. But I think as we're starting to really have a reckoning with the value in telling other people's stories and other people telling their own stories, I think we're starting to see more exploration of different perspectives. And so that's something to me as a filmmaker that's so important. And I appreciate that you acknowledge, like, it comes from a love of movies. Mm-hmm. Like, just because a movie isn't about a character that looks like you doesn't mean you don't love it. And I think that it's very exciting that we're getting to see more movies about characters who look like me, and more movies about characters who don't look like me but look like people who also haven't had their stories told. So it's an exciting time to be getting to make movies about different perspectives.
Rachel, I love the evolution of Jean. I was even paying attention to the costumes, that at first she's got this glamour to her, and then slowly there's a calibration change in her evolution. Can you talk about was that a challenging to calibrate her slow evolution into? I mean, by the time we see her physically in the last scene, she's a completely different Jean.
Yeah, well, I love that you brought up the evolution of the costumes, because those conversations with our amazing costume designer, Natalie O'Brien, were so key to understanding Jean's journey. She is a storyteller herself, and has had so carefully thought out how that physical transformation would unfold, as had our brilliant hair and makeup team. And it really helped at every stage of the journey to even just physically feel how different those clothes were. That glamour was somewhat empty. It was this expectation of what it felt like an expectation of what someone in Jean's position would look like and would be like, but it wasn't necessarily her. And I love that the next version of Jean is from a Bobby Mart, which is essentially like a Walmart of the 70s, and the clothes felt polyester and a little bit cheaper. And then to be able to wear literally someone else's clothes in the cabin, to wear Art's clothes, and to wear Cal's clothes and Terry's clothes, because that was the only option available, just had a completely different feeling. And that greatly aided the storytelling of Jean's journey, but also, again, through many conversations with Julia. And something that Julia said that really unlocked the evolution of Jean's journey for me, and I've spoken about this a bit, but it changed everything, was a conversation about what what trauma can feel like inside one's head. This metaphor of a filing cabinet that, you know, holds your entire worldview and keeps you organized. This idea that when a trauma occurs, the filing cabinet gets dumped out all over the floor, and that a lot of the reason why Jean's only dialogue early in the film is repeated question asking is because she's trying to put the files back in order and trying to re-understand the world around her. And at some point, it's been dumped out so many times that she really, you know, she decides to create a new one, as it were, and she has this new chosen family that helps create a new understanding of the world around her. And I love that when the film ends, it's really just the beginning of this new Jean, who I imagine grows exponentially after we leave her.
Speaking of metaphors, and I was telling this to a friend, is that the first time we see her, she's trying to get those tags of the clothing off because they're weighing her down, and she needs to cut off the tags. I have to ask you, Julia, about the scene in the disco, the fact that she gets shoved in this phone booth and we see from her point of view what is happening. How did that shot come about? Was that always the way you envisioned it in the script?
So the nightclub sequence was in the script from the first draft. And for me, the big moment of the nightclub from the first draft was when she busts out. And I always saw so clearly and prayed that I would have a lead actor who would be willing to just throw her own body into it so that we could really be seeing our lead actor's face and do it all in one take. And she did, and Bryce, our DP, operated, and we had an amazing stunt team keeping the and Jason, who had literally had his hand on Bryce's back to protect him. You know, literally threw them into this chaos. And so that was always the big moment for me. But it was funny because it was the phone booth was actually Jordan's idea. And it was one of those things that I loved, but it wasn't until we found ourselves having to build that hallway set that we really got to achieve the dream of, because when you're on a set, you can actually be inside, the camera can be inside the phone booth with her. If we were in a real phone booth, we would have had to have figured out some alternate plan for it. But I loved that Jordan had the idea of the phone booth, because I think anytime you're doing a period piece, you have to really immerse yourself in all of the things of the period, and not just like a cool car drives by from the 70s, but like a phone booth, you know, like a wooden phone booth with a you know, one of those folding doors with the glass. And so, you know, just by virtue of it being a 70s film and being able to have a phone booth like that, I think we achieved one of the most evocative images and metaphors of the film, which is her being put in this glass box. You know, it's funny.
And the way that she has always seen life, the way that you know, outside of her control, and all of a sudden we're seeing, and she's in the middle of it as well, which is it's a powerful visual. It's an incredible visual.
And when Jordan had the idea too, it brought, I love when there are already things working together, even though something's a new idea. I feel like that's how you know you're in it with a script or with a movie. Like, she's in the box in the cabin, you know, in the trapdoor in the cabin, and the doll's house of the, you know, we had this tiny little house for the safe house with all of this like pretty floral wallpaper. You know, she's in a doll's house. Like, the movie keeps putting her in boxes, and I loved that Jordan came up with that final box that she, you know, breaks out of into the chaos. She's done being trapped.
I also love that you get the opportunity to be in Jean's perspective in that moment, because I know that even though you weren't always on my face as an actor, that, you know, we originally did it silently. I feel like we did a couple takes without the action happening in the other room, and then at some point we had the background actors sort of start kind of running and screaming. And I mean, when I tell you that my heart stopped, it was like, I remember finishing that scene and feeling like I wanted to burst into tears. I think that part of that is this modern moment that we're living in, where someone, a fear that I have is of being in a position like that where something is happening in another room that you can't see and all you can hear is people's fear. And being with Jean in that space was an incredible moment that I'm so glad that our audience gets to experience in her perspective. But man, it was oof.
And then, I mean, just to speak a little bit to putting it in at the script level, which is where it was. I can't remember exactly when we, because we were always sort of, I think it was like that before, by the time it got to Rachel, like it was put into the script at some point when we were developing the script over the past couple of years. But putting it in there was just sort of where it came from originally, was this idea of anytime we felt like something wasn't entirely working, the solution was always, how can we be more in Jean's point of view? And how can that point of view speak to something that is traditionally part of this genre, but from a perspective that we haven't seen it before? So like that's where that, the genesis of that came from. And then wanting it to feel very period, wanting it to feel, again, thematically with the boxes, which wasn't top of mind, but eventually, we sort of leaned into that a little bit. But yeah, the guiding principle at all levels, script level, production level, and then post level, was always, if there's a problem, when in doubt, just make sure we're with Jean in some way. We're with her emotionally, we're with her, actually, physically, we're with her perspective, and seeing only what she sees and closing off everything else. So
and Jordan, following up on the script, one of the things that I'm infatuated with is that there is all this other plot happening beyond her vision. Was that all plot out? And you guys?
Yeah, it was. We wrote a whole document of what the Eddie and then ultimately the Cal story was, that was happening. We always, what we refer to this as the movie happening underneath that movie, right? So we wrote out a document of that, and then that document continued to shift. And then as that shifted, it affected conversations that were then being had in, for example, the club, because the club is definitely the main intersection of those two narratives in a way. It's where they all kind of come together for a moment before they then kind of crisscross off into their own separate things again. And so, making sure that we were landing that narrative and landing our narrative was definitely, it
was fun.
It was fun.
But it was fun to really find little ways to weave Eddie's movie.
Yeah.
Because essentially he's the main character of all of those 70s crime dramas. And so how can we keep those two movies running, because when Tuesday Weld gets in the car and Thief, I'm like, where is she going? I want to know what happens to her. And so where Thief goes with James Caan, our movie goes with Tuesday Weld, but the James Caan movie is still, that story is still happening. And so it was really fun to craft, even just for us in the background of what was happening to Eddie as we're watching.
And then there's stuff, there was also then stuff that we had thought of, but I think there was that's when you sort of know you're in it. There are questions that people have asked us about that storyline that we hadn't entirely thought about, that make a ton of sense to us, and really do wind up working. Smaller detail
things. Well, that's what's fun when you leave things, when you stay in the authenticity of a moment with characters. There are open-ended things, get left open-ended. For example, was Evelyn with the bad guys, or was she just also an innocent bystander? And you never get to find out, because Jean never gets to find out. And I love when I watch that in movies, when there are things that are open-ended, because it allows you as an audience member to create and invent your own version of the story.
Rachel, we rarely see a mother who doesn't bond with her baby in movies, and the baby becomes the main character as well. Can you tell us about working that motherhood aspect of Jean?
Yeah, I'm so grateful that a story like this exists about a mother who doesn't instantly bond with the child for whatever reason that is. You know, there are many other stories about why women and their children don't immediately bond. And it's not something that I was very familiar with as someone who doesn't yet have children. I had never heard stories like this. And I'm so grateful to have had many conversations with Julia about, you know, people that these two were aware of who had shared stories, and hearing more stories as I began to talk to people about this film and what I found so exciting about it. We need more stories so that people don't feel so alone. You know, there's a lot in this film that honors quiet women who feel like they've had to undergo an experience like that alone, and who are certain, as Jean is, that they are the only person in the world who must feel this way. And it is through stories like this. I mean, I've had women reach out to me saying that they had had experiences with infertility, or, you know, a number of things that connected with Jean, saying that they felt like this film helped them heal and helped them feel seen. And that's huge. I mean, what more could we possibly ask for? But working with the babies was definitely a challenge. And I'm grateful that I'm so grateful for that evolution of the relationship between Jean and Harry, because babies aren't acting, that we shot primarily in chronological order. So the audience actually does get to see that bond develop on screen in real time. We developed a shorthand as much as a baby and an adult who's not their parent can. We really began to trust each other and understand each other, and it was a really special experience. And so it feels really earned by the time that Jean and Harry reunite towards the end of the film. And for the record, that incredible shot of baby Harry smiling is actually him looking at me off camera. And that, I think, speaks volumes about the bond that we did develop. But more stories about quiet women, please.
Well, and in particular, you know, it comes back to, we talk a lot about representation in terms of gender and race in film, but also we need more representation within that representation, because I think the reason that women are quiet and feel shame about not necessarily bonding with their baby or feeling like they're an amazing mother, you know, there are so many women who either give birth to or adopt babies that they struggle to bond with at first, and they don't talk about it. Like, the reason that there aren't more stories about it is because there's so much shame about it. And so I think the more stories we have and the more representation we have about the millions of different versions of motherhood that exist, and that they're all okay, I think the better. And also, I have to say, Rachel Brosnahan is an incredible actor, but I think the most impressive acting she did is she loves babies so much. And I think some of the most impressive, and those babies in particular, and I think some of the most impressive acting she does in the film is when she is disconnected from them. Because I would say cut, and she would immediately be like, oh, good.
Well, I was just like, I feel so, I had to practice kind of ignoring them a little bit when we first started working together, because I do love babies. Who doesn't love babies? You're a monster if you don't love babies.
You'd be surprised.
You'd be surprised.
They make me nervous. I don't like being around them because they make me nervous.
Well, they made me nervous before I had one. I remember being like, I don't know what to do with the baby, but then there's a baby around and you're like, you know what to do with the baby. So.
I feel like the more time you spend, because I don't have children, but I've spent a great deal of time with babies, between nieces and nephews and babies on set, and I feel like it does start to develop. But one of the hardest things was practicing, and they could feel it, like being disconnected from them, carrying them around and not really engaging with them. They can feel that. And honestly, I think that's part of the reason why they cried a fair amount. It's not super natural, and not the relationship with women in their lives that they're used to experiencing. And it was it was a really special relationship to watch unfold on screen and to be one half of. But I was about to say, and I thought you were going to say, Julia, that the babies are the best actors in this movie. They're amazing. baby Oscar for these two.
Seriously.
Julia, I have to ask you about the style of the film. It's I was reading too much into it, but it's like this cinematic version of the 70s. It's a cross between what the 70s actually looked like and the way we imagine the 70s in the movies. Can you talk about how you arrived into that to the look of the film?
I'm so excited that that was your experience of it, because that's totally what we were going for. We wanted to make a movie that felt like a 70s movie and not a movie that looked like it was made about the 70s. You know, it drives me crazy when I see period pieces that are like set in 1975 and like everything on screen is from 1975, which of course is completely inauthentic. You know, in a movie that was made in the 70s, you know, there's a hairstyle that's like a few years old, or a sweater that's a few years old, and then there's a brand new car, but there's also a car that's 10 years old. There's a song on the radio from that year, but there's also records that you listen to that are from 20 years ago. You know, real life is like that. We all have things around us in our homes that are from a myriad of different years. You don't buy all new furniture every year. I mean, maybe some people do, but I certainly don't. And so I think our guiding principle was that we wanted it to look and feel like a movie made in the 70s, but also like real life, in that, you know, in those 70s movies, there was stuff from a bunch of different years.
Yeah.
You know, following up on the progression, we talked about Natalie O'Brien and the costumes that do a progression, but when it comes to the set, also there's a visual progression where you get this, Jean's home is very contemporary, but there's an austerity to it. Then she moves into the safe house, which is, you know, drabby, and by the time we get to the cabin, there's a rustic warmth to the visuals, you know, and Rachel, you're welcome to chime in. How did you, was that part of the script, that visual progression of the environment?
Yeah, we absolutely wanted to show her growth and her experience of herself and her life and the world around her visually through the different locations and production design. You know, that in the beginning, she is this trophy wife, this doll in this like perfect, you know, contemporary, that is the house that has the most contemporary 1970s specific stuff in it. You know, everything is designed perfectly. There are no personal artifacts about, it's all mostly design items. And then the safe house is this like sort of 1940s, 1950s looking doll's house, kind of creepy, like everything's like nice and fine and safe, but it's definitely a lot of older furniture and older design choices. And then the cabin is the place that's the most warm and the most familial. You know, you have the pictures of Cal and Art's family. You have all of their old clothes and old games and old objects, you know, that have been passed down through the generations of this one family. And, you know, I always love to have meetings with all of my department heads very early on in prep, so that we all make sure we're making those design choices together, so that the journey tracks on all visual levels. And so, you know, Rachel and Jordan and I would meet with Natalie O'Brien, our costume designer, Gabe Buckley, our production designer, and Bryce Fortner, our DP, very early on, and discuss that was our desire. And so that we're all working in concert to make sure that shows up in all different aspects of what you see on screen.
And then some of those meetings too are very specifically about color.
Yes.
Like they're about sort of evolution of style and evolution of design, but then there are some that are just specifically about color. There are some specifically about like what these various sets need to evoke and the look of them need to evoke emotionally. So it's not just, you know, a meeting to talk about that evolution, but then broken out into separate meetings that focus on specific aspects of what that evolution is and how those individual aspects evolve. So there's definitely a lot of that up front.
And Rachel, for you, that the production design, the way that the environment evolves for Jean, is that something that helped you acting wise?
Definitely. I mean, one of the things that I love the most about working with department heads as an actor, but have even more love and respect for after having been a producer on this film as well, is how key those storytelling elements are to crafting a character. And how, I mean, one of the greatest gifts when everyone, as it was this entire design team, is as talented as they are, is to be able to walk onto a set and feel like you've time traveled, feel like you've been transported, and feel the emotions that this character is supposed to be feeling just because of a series of colors or a wallpaper or the way that a room is laid out. I mean, it's the greatest gift as an actor is to be able to do nothing but be present. And that was something that we experienced here tenfold. The different motel rooms in particular, and how different they felt from Jean and Eddie's house. And then how, I mean, the cabin in particular, you pointed it out so beautifully, but it feels lived in and so warm. And it's that kind of family home environment that Jean has never experienced. And even though she's alone there for a good period of time, it's a completely different kind of alone. It's the beginning of her bonding with Harry and finding this new version of herself. And so much of that comes from that space. And that was one of the coolest ones, just on a nerdy technical level, to see evolve, you know, having seen some like early sketches and swatches and things about, you know, what that cabin might look like, going to the site before it was built, and on a rainy, wet, cold day, you know, with all these people standing out there with umbrellas and, you know, in rain gear, looking at these series of posts in the ground going, all right, yeah, this is where the hole's gonna be. And, you know, and then finally arriving to shoot at this cabin, and it feels like it had been there for generations.
Well, it was still raining, I think.
It was still raining, snowing at that point, I think.
Yeah.
Just as muddy, but what an extraordinary transformation of a space in the middle of nowhere.
I have to talk about the action, you know, chase sequence at the end. One of the, and I was explaining this to my hubby, that so many times in movies, just chase sequences are thrown around just to, you know, just for the sake of putting a chase sequence. But this one is tied so closely to the character, in the sense that we have a very passive character at the beginning of this movie that all of a sudden she's taking literally control of the wheel. Can you tell us about shooting that sequence, the development of the chase sequence?
I just love you, Roger. I just love, like, I can't tell you how, I mean, I know I've said this to you before in private, but like how rewarding it is as a filmmaker to just hear someone who knows so much about film and loves film so much, just so completely get what you were up to as a filmmaker. It just
wow.
I know I speak for the three of us when I say that too. It's just it's the best feeling. Like, I'll be honest, you know, having all of these conversations over Zoom has been so rewarding, but also challenging. I don't have to tell you guys, we've all been doing a lot of it, and there's a lot of it that's so draining and sad, because you want to be connecting with people and seeing, like, I want to be seeing this audience right now, like I want to be hearing your reactions and seeing your faces, and it's so hard not to get to. And so hearing things like that is definitely like the fuel that gets us through you know, this challenging time where we're all so disconnected. So thank you. And now I'll actually answer your question. But that was exactly what we wanted to do. You know, when you're inviting yourself into a genre that hasn't been very inviting to you, you know, as a woman, because you also love it, you want to honor the landmarks of it. And a car chase is, of course, the biggest landmark of a 70s crime drama. And so we had to have a car chase, but we really needed it, as you said, we really needed it to be thematically connected and also connected to story. We didn't just want to throw it in there for the sake of throwing it in there. And so we thought to ourselves, okay, car chases have been done so many times, like what can we do that will make it feel connected to Jean and her story? And it's to make what was important about the car chase be about her emotional experience of it, much like in the nightclub. You know, again, a shootout is such a staple of 70s crime dramas, but how can we make it about Jean and her perspective, and how she's so outside of the crime that's happening, and you don't even see you don't even see a single gunshot on camera in that whole shootout sequence. It's really about, again, just staying with Jean and her emotional and psychological experience of it. And so that was also what we really focused on for the car chase, was like, how can we be in this emotional experience of it with Jean? And then obviously cars being such a big part of 70s movies in general, you know, how can we utilize the idea of the car itself, not just the car chase, to connect to Jean's character? And of course, as you said, it's like, it starts out at the beginning of the film, her husband won't even let her drive the car. And by the end of the movie, she's in the driver's seat. And I think one of our favorite moments in the movie is when Rachel is driving the car for the first time. And Rachel just does this gorgeous job of like, of course she knows intellectually, but she's never actually done it. And so that beautiful wordless dance of like, okay, how do I get this car going? And then one of our favorite moments is when it bumps up.
Backs up over the curve.
It's like this little moment, but I think it says so much. And she just did that.
Rachel also has never driven a car. So, yeah.
But it's just,
I'm not a great driver.
you're in this like, you're in this like intense moment, but you really want to stay in the authenticity of it at the same time. And of course, Jean wouldn't know, how to back up her, we didn't want her to suddenly like be great behind the wheel, I love that little moment.
Rachel, tell me, working with Marcia Stephanie Blake, it's quite a unique relationship. I don't recall seeing a relationship quite like this one.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible on so many levels. Marcia Stephanie is a dear friend of mine. We met doing a fellow at New York Theater Workshop a number of years ago. I guess not that long ago. What is time? In 2016, which feels like a lifetime ago. And we actually got to explore, she so beautifully pointed out, some similarities in the relationship between the characters of Amelia and Desdemona and Jean and Terry. And one of the challenges for us was knowing each other so well, how we could create these characters who not only didn't know each other and were meeting for the first time, but who are both apprehensive and somewhat distrustful of the other person's motives, who then end up developing this beautiful relationship and becoming a family, becoming a chosen family that ultimately will be a huge part of their next chapter together. But Marcia Stephanie, I mean, she's one of the most gifted and beautiful actresses I've ever had the privilege of working with. And I honestly can't believe that I got to do it twice. Her well runs so deep, and she's 5'2". She's this tiny woman whose energy and whose spirit takes up space 5 times her size. She is so present and so generous as a scene partner. I mean, she's been underrated for so long, and I'm just so excited that people over the last couple of years, not just this film, but have really discovered how talented she is. And yeah, it was so much fun on and off camera.
Rachel's first task as a producer was casting her.
It's true.
In my very first conversation I had with Rachel about the script, she said, when she was like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm going to be playing Jean, and she was going to be producing the movie with Jordan. She was like, who have you thought about? Literally the first thing after all of that, she said to me, is like, who have you thought about for Terry? And I was like, well, we've been thinking about a couple of people. She was like, Marcia Stephanie Blake. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I agreed with her. But like, I loved that. That was how Marcia Stephanie came to play Terry, was that Rachel brought her to my attention, and she was like, there's no one else for this part. And I couldn't agree more.
This is not a question, it's just a comment, but one of the moments that my heart was in my throat was when Terry tells her, whatever you hear, don't turn around, and then you keep the camera on Jean, and of course you do hear. It's what you don't see in this movie that really grips you and shocks you as well. Jordan, and was that something that you guys discussed? Is about the things that you don't see?
Very much so. I mean, we made a very conscious decision about wanting to put a lot of how do we make compelling set pieces while putting some things off screen and focusing again on character and emotion. But that sort of ties back to what I was saying about perspective. I think a lot of the times what's happening in the pictures that we're and the genres that we're playing with is that those people are not the ones doing the violence. And so as a result, they're having violence done unto them sometimes, but also violence is happening in other places. And so in staying with Gene's perspective, it felt both a interesting cinematic choice to be able to kind of put things are happening off screen and allow you to imagine it, but also a sound narrative choice as well. And so, check both those boxes. So it was definitely at the script level, very, very much an intentional one.
And I have to ask about Natural Woman. Was that always part of the script, that Natural Woman is integral to the story? And then the second part of the question is about Rachel and the diner singing the song.
Yeah, and because we started writing the script before I had even started directing, and that was in the very first draft of the script. And part of that comes out of the fact that I sing that song to my kids. Like, you really do, as a parent, run out of lullabies very quickly, especially when you have 2 kids to sing to every night. And my older son just loved, that little thing I would do with him. And little did I know that thematically, again, it's that thing where I think you always do a better job as a writer when you're not trying to connect the dots, when you just put a thing in for different reasons, but then it ultimately ends up connecting to the larger themes of the piece, which of course is Gene singing to Harry, this baby who has come into her life after she couldn't, get pregnant and give birth. She has this child come into her life and ultimately becomes his mother, and she becomes his son. This idea of her singing to him, "You make me feel like a natural woman." And when my soul was in the lost and found, you came along to claim it. It's funny how these songs that are so explicitly written as love songs, like romantic love, when you sing them to a child, can somehow become about something completely different. We just got very lucky that our amazing music supervisor, Dan Wilcox, was able to secure the rights to that song. It also happens to be my favorite song, so it was a dream to get to have it in the film.
And then I just want to speak to them singing at the diner a little bit, because originally, did you want to speak to
No,
that?
I think he was asking Rachel.
Oh, okay. Or
No,
Rachel can talk about
I want to hear what you're going to say.
Well, maybe you should
go
speak,
ahead.
and then I'll add the thing I want to add, depending on what you say. You go first.
I want to hear. Okay. I mean, I don't. It was one of my favorite scenes in the script. It's such a beautiful and really vulnerable moment for someone who is so afraid to show that side of herself, and it's where I think you see the Gene that's been, or a piece of the Gene that's been hidden away for such a long time, even from herself. And one of the beautiful things that happened in the moment, I suppose I should say that it always feels, scenes that are my favorite in the script always feel like the scariest ones to shoot, because you just don't want to ruin it, like something that meant so much to you. And it was really amazing how that scene unfolded in the moment, how different the singing of it felt than I had imagined it would, and how it created this really strange and interesting and magical moment between Gene and Terry, and between Arinze and I. I think we didn't really rehearse that scene. We didn't really know what was going to happen. And having just come out of this incredibly traumatic experience that they shared, it didn't feel like something that could feel lighthearted in any way. And we found ourselves giggling and having so much fun singing this song to each other. And it was one of those lightning in a bottle scenes to shoot that you dream about when you sign up for a project like this.
Mm-hmm. And
Now
no, go ahead. Go ahead, Jordan. Yeah.
About the singing. It's better to come after that. So at the script
I
level,
was directing.
what?
See,
Yeah,
I
it
was
was good.
directing.
At the script level for a very long time, it was just Gene singing.
Right.
And then we watched a Sidney Lumet film,
Running on
Running on
Empty.
Empty. And there's an amazing sequence in that film where they all sing Fire and Rain all together. It starts as one of them, and then they kind of all sing it together, and it kind of blossoms.
Well, it's even
into
better.
This, like,
it starts as they're it
Listen
starts
to
as
the-
a needle
right.
drop, and you don't realize that it's a record that they're listening to. Like you
Right.
think it's
Or it's
just
on the
like
radio,
a
I
needle
think.
drop. And I think you think it's a needle drop, and then they start singing. You're like, oh my god, it's in. They're listening to it,
right?
And it's just.
And then they start singing it, and they
Oh,
also sing it
it's so
together, and it's
incredible.
just like, oh, like just sort of as inspiration from that little. And Lumet, obviously big inspiration in general, but that that moment became an inspiration for the, like, out of what was a very difficult experience for them to experiencing this thing, together. Became an inspiration for, oh, well, Cal needs to join her in that moment. And
Little did we know what a gorgeous singer. Rachel
yeah,
Kenny
exactly.
is.
And so, like,
Yeah,
it
it's
sort of shifted
incredible.
the way that scene ends in what we thought was a really, really beautiful way.
Yeah.
And how you need moments of, Rachel mentioned, like, because we had shot, as you said, as Rachel said before, like, we shot most of the movie in order because of the baby, but it was also a really beautiful gift for a million other reasons, which is, after the scene that takes place at Evelyn's house and how traumatic and awful it is, that, we need out of trauma to, like, have moments of respite and calm. And, we sing songs to babies to soothe them and to make them feel safe and to relax them. And that's what ultimately Gene and Cal are doing in that moment for each other.
Yeah, and the other thing that I adore is the one where the cop pulls them over, and Gene has that moment of realization that, like, I didn't know I could lie like this. And can you tell us about shooting and also about writing that scene? And how timely that scene has become with everything that has transpired this past summer.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned that at the beginning. That way in which things in the film that we shot in 2019 became in some ways even more resonant in 2020. I think some of them surprising circumstances of this moment, like isolation and quarantine, but in terms of racism and what has come to light this year in particular, but how we've been dealing, that scene somehow feels more relevant this year, but also has been happening for centuries, and certainly in America in particular, that scene has played out way too many times with much different results. And it was something that was really important to us in crafting the very first draft of the script, was that I, as a white woman, was interested in exploring intersectionality in regards to the bubble that Gene starts in, and her awareness of how she is subjugated as a woman but privileged as a white one, and the way in which she sees Cal's experience as a Black man in America and then Terry's experience as a Black woman in America, and how different they are from her own.
Yeah. Well, I do have to tell you, Rachel, that my husband is a huge fan of Mrs. Maisel, and he saw the movie. And then afterwards, I told him, I said, "That's Rachel Brosnahan from Mrs. Maisel." He goes, "No, are you kidding?" I mean, it's a credit to how good, how good you are in this film that he didn't recognize you.
Thank you for sharing that.
That's amazing.
Means a lot to me. Thank you.
Yeah, but you guys, I have kept you for an hour, and I could go on, but we should.
This has been fun. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, to everybody listening, please spread the word. It's on Amazon Prime playing right now. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you.
Thanks,
everyone.
Roger.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.